Well, welcome along to another episode of Sweet Tea and Coffee. We're so glad that you are here. And Blake, today we're going to be talking with Lorri Shrewsbury. And Lorri has a interesting background that some may not know. She was in the military, and you have a particular fascination with, not, I would say it's more nuanced than just the military in general, more specifically military aircraft.
Well, yeah. It just depends on the day of the week.
And so, depends on the...
Because sometimes it's not just military aircraft.
Well, I'm saying...
That's one of my specialties, I guess, my favorite things, but, you know.
Tell people the last military historical thing you listened to or studied.
The last thing?
Yeah, like this is the last podcast you listened to or the last book you read. Well, you don't read books. You have this thing where you just listen to
a lot of books.
Blake, don't let him tell you he read
But it needs to be military.
Yeah. Like what's the last
aircraft?
No, not necessarily aircraft, but just what's the last military historical investigation you did?
Okay.
What did you just recently learn about? Tell us a fun fact.
I think, because this could go along.
This is the intro, so you need to hurry up.
I've recently listened to some audiobooks, a lot of audiobooks about the Vietnam War and specifically helicopter pilots. That's been really interesting to me. It was an area that I didn't know much about. I spent a lot of time in World War II history in those planes, but I was venturing out a little bit.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
that's great. That's exactly the kind of thing I expected you to say. So that's getting to know Blake a little bit more.
Yeah.
So if you're into Vietnam era helicopters, then you and Blake have got some conversation.
Really, any kind of 20th century military history, I'm all about it.
Well, so then I expect normally on these podcasts, you kind of just are in the background. I expect a lot from you today, Blake.
All right.
I'm just
set
so
those
gear up, people. Let's see what
high.
Blake can do today. Let's go. Well, as I said, we've got Lorri Shrewsbury in the house with us. Lorri, you have not been in Nacogdoches too terribly long. I'm excited to get to that part in your story. So welcome, and we're so glad that you and your crew are here. But let's start where we always start, which is the great debate, sweet tea or coffee. Now, what do you have here? This is neither.
Sweet tea or coffee. This is correct. I actually was going to stop and get a chai latte, but the place I stopped had none. So I had to default to something else since I don't drink coffee. So sweet tea would be my choice.
That chai latte is like walking the line right there.
Yeah, it's like
a little bit of both.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, when I say chai latte, it's not the coffee. They have a coffee version that they put chai in. No, it's just the chai tea with
Where do you...
milk. It was Stonehouse, but they were out. But Grando also does a really nice.
Okay, so fun fact about Lorri. One time I was having one of my usual, for whatever reason on Sundays, sometimes my voice is just collapsing. And it was one of those Sundays where I was gargling my sermon, I'm sure, because my throat was so bad. Lorri hooked me up with some tea that you got. Where is a black tea? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Are you talking about the evening tea?
Yeah.
Yes.
And you had some on hand, and it was so good. It's a black evening tea.
Yeah, decaffeinated. Yeah.
Yeah. And you gave that to me, rescued me on a Sunday morning, and then you got me a box of it because I loved it so much. Where did you get it? Doesn't it come from somewhere unique?
The first time I tried it, we were in Tokyo.
Okay.
And the Navy has a military hotel right smack in the middle of Tokyo. And we had dinner there one night, and when dinner's done, they offer you coffee or tea, and so they bring the box around so you can choose, and I was looking for something decaffeinated.
Yeah.
Otherwise I'll never sleep. And the waiter pulled that out, and I've loved it ever since. But the company's called Ahmad, and I think they're based in London or something like that. But I get it on Amazon.
Oh, you shouldn't have said that. I felt like you got it from somewhere really exotic. You've traveled all over the world. I felt so. Amazon just really let me down right there. But it's such a good tea. Anyway, okay. So I think solid win for the for the T.
It's a
group
different
there.
type of tea.
It's a different type of tea. Solid win for
Yeah.
the T group. Well, cool. Well, Lorri, okay, so many things to get into. You have a unique story, and I want to get into that. But let's start just kind of where did you grow up? What was life like as a kid? Where did that take place? Give us kind of the early days.
Okay. Well, I'm originally from Central Florida, a small town called Eustis, and population was about 3,000 when I was growing up. Went to, K through 12, basically the same people, all 12 years, lived in the same house, which is an interesting comparison to my husband, who hardly lived anywhere as a kid for longer than a couple of years.
Yeah.
So we were very opposite in that respect. My dad was a carpenter. My mom was a stay-home mom. And I have an older brother and an older sister by quite a bit. I was caboose, so they're 12 and 14 years older than I am.
Wow.
And went to junior college after high school.
Did you stay in Florida for that?
Oh, yes. Well, we paid for our own college education. So the cheapest thing was to live at home and get my associate there, and then transferred to Florida State and finished out my bachelor's degree.
That's right. We're recording this at a time where the Final Four is about to start, and it really hurts Lorri to have to admit that Florida is in the Final Four.
But it doesn't mean they're in my bracket.
But it doesn't mean that they're in her bracket. So, okay, so you went to Florida State. So that was your last 2 years. So you went to Florida State.
Yes.
Okay. Now, so I kind of, spoiler at the top of the show, mentioned that you served in the military and in the Navy.
No.
Air
Air Force.
Force.
I should have had that.
That's okay. I still like you, Kendall.
Should have had that in my notes.
Oh,
that was
gosh.
terrible. When did that start to become a thought for you? What kind of going into your Florida State years was the plan? Was that the plan, or was that a
Well, since
unexpected
we're
turn?
doing a deep dive today, I will share the whole thing with you.
Yeah, sure.
So, for some reason, I always thought that there would be this thing that I was supposed to do. I did well in high school and college, but I almost liked too many things to really focus on one. And in my high school years, I was very frustrated because, the whole push to, what are you going to major in? And what do you want to be when you grow up? And I had no clue. And I prayed about it and, Lord, just show me what it is. I'll do it, which I thought was pretty cooperative on my part.
That's right.
And for whatever reason, he didn't really make anything evident. And we can circle back to that later because as I got older, I kind of had a different way of looking at it that I thought was a lot more healthy. So out of my frustration, I was like, okay, God, I'm not asking for world peace. I just want you to tell me what I should do. And if you can't do that, then fine. I'll do this on my own. So off I went. That
was like a very cognitive, you were frustrated with God, so I'm going to do this on my own. That was
Yes.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
It didn't do a very good job of it.
Yeah.
I started off as a broadcast/film major, went to Florida State with that intention, realized that I really didn't want the insecurity of that business because you go from job to job to job, and I'm very much a structure kind of person. So I did a hard over on structure and became an education major.
Yeah, that's quite the jump.
Yeah. And got a degree in secondary English education. Did my internship my last semester, hated every moment of it.
Wow.
Graduated and never set foot in a classroom after that. So late 80s, job market stinks. I go home. I don't have any plans. And short answer is I worked in a bank for 3 years. But God used that time.
And this is back home.
This is back home.
Okay.
I had kind of, I knew that I had wandered away and I needed to go back. I missed God. But anyway, found a local church, got in with their college and career group. We had Bible studies. We did lots of activities together. It was just a good time for me to grow in my faith and learn things that I didn't know as much as I thought I did.
Yeah.
And if I can take it aside, my beef, if you will, was that it seemed like they had me from literally the crib to graduation, high school graduation, and there were so many things I hadn't learned. And I looked at the quarterly as being a lot of fluff.
You're
and
talking
no
about
substance.
the church.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just felt ill-equipped to own my own faith. For example, I remember being in a literature class, and I can't remember what we were talking about, but he was connecting different mythologies and literature styles and religions like Christianity, talking about how you see a repeat of a son-mother relationship, or you have a king or a god in control and something happens to that god and his or if it's a goddess, their land becomes desolate, and it isn't until they're restored that things return and flourish.
Yeah.
And he's lumped Christianity in with that.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking it felt like the floor opened up underneath me because I had never heard anything like that before. And I was like, how could you consider Christianity mythology? I know now that the reason those themes recur is because Satan takes the truth, which is Christ's death and resurrection. You have, the sin in Genesis, that it brings the desolation to the land, if you will. And when Christ is resurrected, he fulfills as the second Adam. Anyway, I'm digressing, but I had no clue. And I just remember I felt like there was a secret that other people knew that somehow I didn't know. Anyway, it was upsetting at the time.
So that was part of, looking back, that was part of your frustration with the church, just like feeling that this history, my background within the church, really didn't prepare me to answer the questions of the real world, answer the adult level questions.
Yes.
But at the same time, in that time, it sounds like there was a community of people that you were interacting with that was starting to, and then this is after you've come home and started working again, but that was kind of starting to help you re-engage your faith, help you ask some of maybe those harder questions again. What was it about that group that was attractive to you, or that allowed for kind of you to re-engage? Was it something about the group? Was it about the...
well, I can, with a wink and a nod, say, well, it wasn't the church I grew up in. I found another church in town that was bigger, had a bigger peer group. And I knew some of the people who were already going there because we had gone to high school together. Yeah. So I wasn't walking in cold. Yeah. And in fact, that's what I did. I reached out to a young lady that I knew was going there. And I was like, hey, I want to come to church on Sunday. And she's like, great, I'll meet you. So
wow.
That
Okay.
helped.
Okay. Yeah. So you had a relationship that you were able to connect with.
Yes.
Where you were then connected to a larger group. That's so interesting. Okay. So you're working at a bank. You're back at home, but you're wrestling through questions of faith and kind of finding your footing again is what it sounds like. As that process takes place, I assume one of the things that begins to happen is you're also probably asking questions about your future.
Absolutely.
Or were you at that time just saying, no, here it is. I'm going to just be at home forever?
I used to, well, on occasion I still say this, but I go, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, but I know what I don't want to be. A teacher work in a bank.
Yeah, the things you've done.
Mark those off the list.
Right. Tried them. No, I don't want to do them. So even though I had a really good group at church, I was really unhappy working. I just felt like there had to be more to life.
Yeah.
I was kind of bored in my small town. I felt like everybody knew me. Anyway, so I started thinking about other options, and one of which was the military, which growing up, my dad was always watching war movies and stuff like that. So for whatever reason, the Air Force was always interesting to me.
Now, since I already made that mistake, can we just clarify, why was the Air Force more interesting to you than any other branch of the military?
Good question. Don't know if I have an answer for that.
Yeah.
But could be because growing up in Central Florida, we were close to Patrick Air Force Base and Kennedy Space Center. We could watch launches from our front yard.
So cool.
So I think that had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, okay.
So, and the other thing was, I thought, well, maybe I could go back and get a master's degree and do something. Well, I think I would try to get into library science or something. I don't know. So I started the ball rolling, went to see a recruiter, started filling out paperwork for master's programs. So those were kind of running concurrently. And basically it came down to Uncle Sam knocked first.
Okay.
And I got selected for officer training school and then went. So I had a 3-year gap between college graduation and joining the military.
Okay. So for growing up in a pretty stable environment, sounds like small town, lots is familiar. Now you do go off to Florida State, which I'm sure that was kind of its own new experience for you. But then from that straight into the military, what was the adjustment like? Was it shocking, overwhelming, or was it like, here we go, now I've kind of figured out structure and order and things that I really crave? What was your initial experience?
It was pretty overwhelming. The term in the military that I've been, started hearing was drinking from the fire hose. Yeah. And unlike many of my classmates, I had absolutely no experience with the military. We had a few people whose dads had served, so even though they didn't necessarily, they weren't obviously the person who was serving,
right,
they at least had some exposure to that. And then we also happened to have in our particular class, it was like 85% of the class were actually airmen who had done something called bootstrap or some similar program where the military allows them to go to college. And so because they were enlisted and now they have their college degrees, they were going to turn around and go through officer commissioning training. And so they were already active duty.
Yeah.
So a lot of that stuff was old hat for them, but it totally brand new for me.
Yeah, so you're not going through ROTC or anything. You're coming out of college and then, okay, what's next? So they send you to San Antonio, I'm assuming?
Yes, they did.
Talk a little bit about that. I'm just curious. My sister-in-law, I remember when she went through all that, and it was just so interesting to hear. And my brother-in-law, they both went through the Air Force.
We were actually like across the highway from where the basic training is. It doesn't exist anymore. A few years ago, we went to San Antonio as a family trip, and Stephen and I drove over there, and the buildings are still there, but they're all vacant, and quite a number of them are condemned now. Yeah. But we had our own little space. We had some dormitories and a chow hall and classrooms and
right.
track.
So from no military background or experience into full boot camp.
Yeah.
I mean, I would imagine that was a eye-opening experience.
Well, it was, and it was different because it's not what you imagine as far as like somebody in your face yelling at you, and we had. It's
not Full Metal Jacket or anything like that.
Thank goodness, no. I would have been curled up in the corner
as the
weeping.
Marines, yeah.
We were in dormitories, so I had a roommate, and yes, we had physical training. We had to get up at 5:30 in the morning and go do our run or whatever it was we were doing. And, you put on your uniform and you march together in formation to class, blah, blah, blah. But really and I don't know if it's changed because it's been a while, but when I was there, the goal of officer training school was they are going to give you more than you can do. And they want to see how you handle it. How do you prioritize? How much stress do you, how stressed do you get? How do you perform under pressure? And so that's 3 or 4 months of that every day because you have different, you have homework, you have tests, you have the physical aspect of it as far as, passing your physical fitness tests, which you do many, many times. You have to keep your room in inspection order and, make sure your uniform is, pressed and your boots are shined and, just all the little components that by themselves are not necessarily difficult. But when you have all of this stuff going on, how do you handle it?
So we get boot camp, OCS, and then do you do a tech school in that route?
That comes after you get your commissioning, after you graduate.
What was your specialty? Because they don't have English in the Air Force, apparently.
No, they don't.
So I'm curious.
No English lit?
Yeah, no English literature. So what was the path there after that?
I remember knocking heads with my commissioned officer who was in charge of my class. And, and again, it's been a while since I've done this, but when I was writing papers, we never used contractions and you use third person and you don't use you and blah, blah, blah. So we're learning to write Air Force style and it's contractions and yes, it suited its purpose, but I just had the hardest time. I was like, but that's not how you do. Yeah. And I just had to, get used to it. And that's just the way it was. But I remember having moments with my officer trainer guy. I can't even remember what he's called now. But I do remember his name was Trail. His last name was Trail. And we always used to, because he would send out notes to everybody pre-computer, like if you'd messed something up or whatever. And we'd come back at the end of the day and somebody would have to go to his office and collect all the messages and notes and everything. And we used to call it trail mail. Do we have any trail mail? Oh. So, I'm sorry, your question was?
What did you end up kind of specializing in?
Yes, I got to do something that was categorized under Air Force need. I didn't get a choice.
Okay. So, you didn't get to fill out that paper like this is my first choice.
Well, they let you have, you get the illusion of choice. And then at the end, when you check Air Force need, you're done for it. They're going to do whatever they want. I was something called a weapons controller.
Okay.
Actually, Stephen's first job in the Air Force was weapons controller. The easiest explanation of that, and it's only one facet of that career field, is the AWACS. It looks like the frisbees on the top, and that's a radome or a radar dome. The people who sit in that back of that plane and use the radar to talk to other pilots to help them find their targets or other enemy fighters. That's what I did. Except I never actually was on any AWACS. All my jobs were on the ground.
Okay. Well, I guess I've seen a photo of you.
I was going to say, it's a great picture.
So I was just curious, what was the scenario behind the flight suit?
Well, because we worked with fighter pilots a lot, they wanted us to appreciate what they go through. And so on occasion, we would get to fly in the back seat.
Okay. It's like a T-38 or something?
No.
I may be getting too much into the... Here I go into the military.
A T-38 is a training jet.
Okay.
But we were never at a training base.
Okay.
So I rode in an F-16 or an F-16 twice and an F-15 once.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's the training training models. So there's a back seat. Normally it's just a single seater.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I just
had to derail it there.
Yeah,
we can get back to
No, it's good. So in all of this, you came into this process with kind of your faith forming again. Maybe that's a fair way to put it. How does this experience impact that journey? Or rather, maybe say it the other way. How was your newfound footing in your relationship with the Lord impacting the way in which you were going through this time in the Air Force?
Oh, it was very helpful. I think that 3 years God grew me, got me in a position where I'd be ready to go. Now, not that I wasn't stressed or anxious or whatever, because obviously I'm human, I was. But knowing that he had a hand in this and that I was there because he allowed this path to open up for me was huge. And I remember very fondly that the first, I think, month we were there, during meals, we couldn't talk to each other. And so you would sit down and you would just eat your meal. But we were allowed to say grace. And so I noticed that for those of us that did say grace lasted a long time.
You're talking to God and one another.
It's like, Lord, I need this time with you. Just everybody else can wait. No. But so it was kind of fun. And so it was also nice to know that there were people who were in my class who were believers, and we knew that about each other. So that was great too.
Yeah. So how long did that, I mean, help me with in terms of timeline. You've already mentioned Stephen, your husband. When does he enter the picture, and how long were you doing Air Force work before that was over? I mean, just give us a timeline.
So to sum up, I went to OTS in June of 1990. I graduated on October 1st. And then I went to Tyndall Air Force Base for weapons controller training. That happened to also be where he was stationed.
Okay.
So until May of 91, I was training. I went through 2 different schools for weapons controllers. And then my first assignment also happened to be at Tyndall, so I didn't really have to go anywhere. I was at the Southeast Air Defense Sector, which is an alert facility. I think the Guard runs it now. It's not an active duty position anymore. But we would tap into different radar systems from Langley, Virginia to Brownsville, Texas. We were responsible for the Southeast United States. And we would watch the coastline for all incoming aircraft. And that was one of the controversies or points from 9/11, is that the planes that attacked the buildings originated in the United States. So people were like, well, why didn't you know about that? Well, because we're not looking at the planes on the that are already here. We want to see what's coming in. So we would have to, we had a whole section that was dedicated to identifying aircraft. So they would, as things came in, usually because they had filed a flight plan and had a unique squawk. It's a 4-digit code that they use on their transponders. We know who it is. But every once in a while, you get somebody who's coming in. Maybe it's some dentist who went to the Bahamas for the weekend, and he was supposed to take off at 2:00, but he wasn't ready, and so he's leaving later, and so he's off his flight plan.
Those dentists.
I know. Especially the ones that fly to the Bahamas for the weekend. So if we couldn't figure out who it was, then we would call the closest base to wherever that unknown aircraft was and scramble fighters. Just get on the phone, let them know what's going on, and they hop up out of their lazy boy and go hop in their jet and take off. They have to be airborne.
Give that dentist a heart attack.
Yeah.
I was going to say,
sometimes
that dentist
it happens.
has a rude awakening.
So, and the other part of it is that we were doing drug interdiction. We had a guy in our facility who was a customs agent, and if he had intel that a certain plane was coming in from South America or whatever, that DEA or whoever said, oh, he's carrying drugs, we would scramble aircraft. Now, we couldn't intercept because this would be more trivia than you want to know. The military does not have posse comitatus. We cannot act as law enforcement. And so the only thing that they can do is they would roll in behind the plane. They would usually have a video recorder. So they would take footage of the plane. They would report the tail number, describe the airplane, so we could, take all that information. And Customs had its own aircraft, but they would take longer to get airborne, and they could actually force the plane down. So sometimes we would get things like, yeah, hang on, he's opening his door. Wait, he's pushing something out.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
There was like a Tom Cruise movie, I feel like.
I think you're right.
Several years ago, it was kind of that same scenario.
Although I think he was one of the drug runners.
Yeah, it was from the other perspective, but yeah.
That is wild.
And
Okay,
then-
so where's Steven? We haven't.
He's across base. I haven't met him yet.
Okay, you haven't met him yet. Okay, so
She's doing all these fun things on
this
one
is
side.
the work.
Yeah.
This is the kind of your daily grind. Okay, and how long did you do that?
Well, I did that for about a year and a half.
Okay.
And then I can't remember. Well, it was in August or September of 91. I had a roommate. She also was a weapons controller. She worked at a different squadron on base on the other side of the highway because Tyndall split right down the middle by, I don't know, Highway 98 or something like that. And she worked at a place called Whetstone. And Stephen's going to kill me if I can't get this right. They did weapons testing. So because we have the lovely Gulf of Mexico out there, there's several airspaces that the military owns and or uses. And they have fighter pilots come from all over the world, and they get to go out and actually fire weapons. And they have telemetry on those. I mean, they come off the rails. Normally, it's just simulated. Mm-hmm. But they actually get to experience what that's like. And using telemetry, they could assess, kind of like watching game films after a football game, for lack of a better way of explaining it. And so he was on the radar side. You know, they had a whole procedures that they had to use. They had to make sure if there were any boats in the area, they had to leave, and lots of safety stuff. And so that was kind of what he was doing. And my roommate worked in the same squadron, and we had gone to the officers club. I think it was they had released like the names of the new majors that were getting promoted, and so it was a big party. And I went, and she was there, and we were chit-chatting and introducing me to some of her coworkers. And Stephen was sitting there, and a few days later, she comes home and says, "Guess who asked about you today?"
Nice.
And so she proceeded to set us up on a date.
Okay. Now I think, and I could be mixing up my stories here, so I've already messed up Navy, Air Force, so feel free and correct me.
No worries.
But I thought I remembered in the early part of y'all's relationship, so I guess this would have been kind of right where you're talking about. You were super serious about your faith. You were in an unwavering point, and I think I remember Stephen not quite being that way. He has a very interesting background. Stephen has actually been on the podcast,
an episode.
so that we don't have to get into all that. You can go listen to that episode. It's number whatever. Look up Stephen Shrewsbury.
I'll overdub that.
But is that right? Is that right that kind of in y'all's early dating relationship, you were a huge factor in his faith?
Yes. Okay. I see your
development, right? I mean,
yes.
am I help me out there?
So when we met, he was not a believer.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah. We'll just cut right to the chase.
Yeah, go.
And I'm trying to explain what I honestly don't know why I would have entertained that, because I certainly knew that was not a good idea.
Sure.
But okay, I'm going to go out on a limb here. This is what you get for asking me to come on this thing. So in my experience as a young 20-something, at this point in time, the young Christian men that I knew did not want to seem to have a desire to settle down. And because they were often outnumbered, really wanted to kind of reach out of their league,
Okay.
for lack of a better way of putting it.
Yeah.
So I didn't stand a chance because there was always someone prettier, cuter, whatever. And I kind of got tired of the games they would play.
Playing that game. Yeah.
So, one of the things I liked about Stephen right away is that he didn't play games. He told me right off the bat that he was tired of, playing games when you're dating. It's not something he was interested in.
Yeah.
And he was looking for he was looking to get married. Mm-hmm. And so that set him apart immediately.
Yeah.
So that was that. He knew how I felt as far as my faith. I didn't, hide it from him. And honestly, it seemed like from the get-go, because we started dating in September, and by October we were going to church together. He was looking for something.
Yeah.
And I knew that I could pray for him. I could try to answer his questions as best I could. And, expose him to God, for lack of a better term. And that was the best thing I could do. I couldn't tell him what to think or believe. It was something that he had to have ownership of, or else it just wasn't true. So, because it was all new to him and he was curious, he was like, well, can we go to this church? So we went to a Methodist church, and we went to a Presbyterian church, and a couple of different Baptist churches, and tried to go to a Mormon church one day. But when we rolled up, they were closed, which I don't think is any coincidence.
Yeah.
And much later we found out it was because it was in October, and that's when they have one of their general conferences. So they weren't having normal services that Sunday. So
interesting. So you guys meet. You go through dating process. You get married. What's the timeline of dating to getting married? Because then you launch off into this wild many-year span where you're all over the world.
Yes.
And I want to get to that.
Okay.
This girl from small town who's there, into her early working career. Now she's all over the world.
Yes.
And I want to get to that.
Yes.
So get us kind of to that point before the worldwide journey begins.
I will try to sum up quickly.
Yeah.
So we met in early September. We're dating. He actually went away for 8 weeks to something called Squadron Officer School. It's continuing education for military officers. So he comes back probably in November-ish. He proposes in February. We're married at the end of May. He starts law school in August in Utah. I have to stay in Florida until December. And a lot of the impetus for that is because if you're not married, the military has no reason to assign you together. And so he was trying for this program so that he could go to law school. And we knew that if he got it, the only way I would get assigned with him is if we were married. So that kind of accelerated things a little bit.
Yeah. So he gets it. He goes through law school, and then it begins. You guys start popping all over the right.
Well, we both we're in Utah. I finish out my last 3 years of active duty service, and then have to get out. That's a whole nother story. I'm not even going to go there. But I get out. We're in Utah for 6 years. He has 3 years in college and then gets assigned at Hill Air Force Base there for 3 years. So that's basically 2 assignments back to back. And then we go to Sumter, South Carolina at Shaw Air Force Base for 3 years. That's where I'm pregnant with Caitlin. We leave for Charlottesville, Virginia. He's been picked up to get an LLM. This time the Air Force is paying for it. And he goes to the Army JAG School, which is on the campus of UVA in Charlottesville. We're there for a year. Caitlin is born. She's about 7 or 8 months old, and his follow-on assignment after school is the embassy at Athens, Greece. And then we spend 15 years overseas in back-to-back assignments.
Yeah, I mean, so 15 years, and can you name all of the? I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you name all the places that
we started in Athens, Greece, and then we went to Guam, tiny little island in the South Pacific. And then we went to Stuttgart, Germany, and then Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii, Yokota Air Base, Japan, and his last assignment was RAF Mildenhall in England.
So, what? I have so many questions, but I think the thing I'm the most. That's just such a unique experience.
Indeed.
On so many levels.
Yes.
It's a unique experience, I'm sure, in that you kind of only have each other.
Yes.
You know, when you move that often, I'm sure the formation of community is really difficult. And then it's also a unique experience in terms of just your perspective. You see so much more than just what you're used to. You know, and even more than your country, your culture. You're seeing people from all over the world and interacting all over the world. So what was the most this is probably really too broad of a question, but I'm going to try it anyway.
We'll start.
What was the most difficult part of that uniqueness? And what was the thing that, in terms of perspective, that really stood? Like, what perspective did you gain that maybe you wouldn't have had otherwise?
We'll start there, because I actually like that question.
Yeah. It's okay. If I ask ones you don't like, you should just ignore them.
It's a really good question.
Okay.
I think perspective is that while I love the United States, I mean, I served my country.
Yeah.
And then as a spouse, if you will, served my country for 25 years.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good things about the United States. But we're not the only ones with good ideas.
Interesting, yeah.
Other places do things differently, and just because it's different doesn't mean it's wrong or bad. Sometimes it's brilliant. For example, Tokyo, one of the largest cities population-wise in the entire world.
Was Tokyo your favorite?
Oh, no, it was my least favorite.
Interesting.
But it was extremely safe. It was not uncommon to see an 8 or 10-year-old child on the subway in Tokyo by themselves. It was totally acceptable. Wasn't weird. You didn't have to worry about it. Theft in Tokyo, well, in Japan, period, is very unusual. You could go to a very nice restaurant in Tokyo. Let's say it's a buffet. Almost every table where people have gone up to get food, they have left their purses, their phones, their wallets, their bags, whatever. Wow. And they will remain untouched. There's something to be said for that.
Sure. So it gave you a window into the way that that life is in other places, and the ability to appreciate.
Oh, absolutely.
Some of that. And I imagine that's kind of a perspective you don't necessarily get when you're just traveling. I think that maybe that appreciation probably comes only because you embed yourself there, you live there, you're kind of part of it. What was the hardest thing? Well, actually, what was your favorite place? You said it wasn't Tokyo really was your least favorite. Do you have a favorite? If you had to go back and live somewhere, where would it be? Maybe I should say it that way.
That's a good question. That's a good way to put it. I would go back to England.
Okay. So what was the hardest thing?
Tokyo was the hardest.
Why was that?
Oh, for so many reasons. which is interesting because it was our kids' favorite assignment. I think largely they enjoyed it the most because we only actually lived on base in two places. One was Guam and one was Japan. And for them, the base was like 1950s Americana.
Interesting.
They could run around with their friends, go down to the playground by themselves, get on their bikes, go all over the place. They had a lot of autonomy.
Yeah.
Which doesn't happen very much anymore in the United States. And they were, Nolan was 3rd to 5th grade and Caitlin was 5th to 7th, I think.
Yeah.
So
so
they
at a
loved
time
that.
where like that was awesome.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But for me, I hated it because it is such a densely populated place.
Yeah.
Like, for example, when we lived in Germany, we would go, oh, let's go to the zoo. And we hop in the car and we drive half an hour to the zoo or whatever. And we do the zoo, have lunch, and come home. And we're home way in time for dinner, to fix dinner and have an evening and blah, blah, blah. Not in Japan. Let me put it this way. The base was about 25 miles west of Tokyo, which is basically from here to Lufkin.
Yeah.
It's going to take you an hour and a half to 2 hours to drive it.
Wow.
If you take the train, it's an hour and a half. Driving actually might be more. It just depends on, what kind of bad luck you have.
Yeah.
If you go anywhere in Japan, you're going to be there with 5,000 of your closest friends. And even though English is more prevalent than it used to be, when I would leave base, I understood what it must feel like to be illiterate because there are signs everywhere, but I can't read a single one.
But you can't read them. Interesting.
Which, funnily enough, if you're in Europe, sometimes you can wiggle a little bit because we share roots with Latin languages like French and Italian and even German roots. And so sometimes you can look at a sign and at least get a general feeling for what's going on. You don't have that luxury in Japan.
Tell me about, because I know just in talking to you guys, and I'm fascinated what you would say here. You've obviously then in those environments, because you both were taking your faith seriously and raising your kids to know and follow Jesus, and that was a huge component of your life. You're experiencing, I guess, on some level, church also globally. Mm-hmm. What perspective did you gain for the church in those experiences? How did that shape your view of the church? By seeing it in so many different cultural contexts?
Again, a great question because I'm going to love answering this. I think we were very fortunate that the church is everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So we were always able to find a body of believers. We generally stayed away from the chapels on base just because that was a preference of ours.
Yeah.
A lot of times the setup is you'll have several Protestant chaplains and they each take turns preaching. So you don't have continuity.
Yeah.
Which was just not what we were looking for. And then, of course, when we were in Athens, we were at the embassy, so there was no base at all. And that was our first assignment, and we found a non-denominational English-speaking church that we went to. And I still remember the first service that we went to. It was only worship. They didn't do Sunday school. And I forget how many countries were represented by this church, but the Kenyan choir sang that morning, and they sang in their own language. And it was so beautiful. And I remember vividly thinking, this is what heaven's going to be like. Wow. And just loving that. And they would have a Filipino choir, and just they would do different things. And we would have a potluck. And so you'd have all these interesting foods to try. And it was just so much fun.
Wow.
And I think the other thing, too, is that if you're in a body of believers and it doesn't really matter where you are, your home.
Yeah. Wow, that's cool.
And just walking in and sharing the Holy Spirit and going, yeah, this is where I want to be, was always a wonderful thing to experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, man, I think about how, Jesus obviously talks about how in him there's this formation of a new family. Mm-hmm. And I mean, he goes to extremes talking about how that even transcends our blood relation. And that's hard to wrap your mind around, especially if you only have been in one context. It's hard to wrap your mind. Okay, what does that mean? But I imagine that takes a whole new shape when you're, like you said, going into a place where culturally it's this mishmash of
you don't
people,
know anyone.
And you don't know anyone. And there's, I'm sure, language barrier and cultural barrier, all sorts of things. And yet it's home. I'm sure that is, like you, yes, I love that you said, this is what heaven's going to be like. I'm sure that is, in many ways, just gives you a profound appreciation for really what God intended this family to be, that we could be at home with one another despite all of those differences, and you got to actually live that out,
yes,
in a really unique way. I'm sure that changes how you approach church even now. I think it probably gives an appreciation for the body of Christ that many don't necessarily have.
True.
Because they haven't been through that experience.
I don't know if this is an appropriate aside or not, but I know when we came here, because the kids had never lived in the continental United States.
Yeah.
Until Stephen retired. But that was one of the things that really bothered the kids, was the lack of diversity when we were in church.
Yeah. Yeah. They're used to this global experience, and yeah, that's amazing. Wow. Well, Lorri, there are so many different things that we could get into. I so appreciate you stopping by and sharing
welcome.
So much of that story. It is so unique. Your experience is so unique, and yet I think there's many things that we can glean from that. I want to just quickly just close by asking you from the end of our conversation there, how would you encourage? So here you are now, you guys. We didn't even get to how you end up in Nacogdoches, that is such a great story in and of itself. You'll have to bump into Lorri and ask her that, or take her to tea. Don't take her to coffee. But what would you say to the church now, to your church, to your where you belong now here at Fredonia Hill? People that are listening. How would you, based on your experience, based on your view of the church as you've seen it globally, how would you encourage your church family to maybe lean into that family dynamic, maybe on a deeper level? What would you say?
That's an interesting question. Honestly, I would say get involved. That was always our philosophy whenever we would go to a new church, because we knew we had a finite amount of time in a certain place. And so we would get busy really quickly. And I know it's easy to go, I'll do it later. Especially when you live someplace and you always live there. You always think, well, I could just do it later.
Yeah.
But I have found that the best relationships, the deepest relationships, the more joy I have going to church and being in God's house with my faith family is when I'm involved in some level. Have I enjoyed all the different ways I've participated? Maybe not. But part of it is finding what does.
Trying it out.
Yeah. If you don't try it out, you don't know.
Yeah.
So that's probably my first
good.
Suggestion or observation.
Yeah, that's good.
All of a sudden I've forgotten.
Well, I think I love that you said that, because I think it would be easy, I think, to say probably if you didn't think you were going to be there for very long, it would be easy to go the exact opposite way. But actually leaning in has made the bigger difference and not putting it off. And I think sometimes when you think you're going to be around someplace forever,
yes,
you do kind of maybe tend to think, like you said, I'll do that later. But you're saying lean in and get involved. I love that.
Well, I think you'd be surprised by what comes of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It may even be things like you said, you may learn you're not an English lit teacher.
Mark some things off that
You
list.
may not mark some things off the list, but I love that.
I've got that list too.
I love it. Well, Lorri, seriously, thank you so much for sitting down with us and sharing some of that story. You can obviously get to know Lorri and Stephen more here at Fredonia Hill. Excited to have them here in Nacogdoches. Like I said, there's a whole part of that story we didn't even cover. But we want to hear from you. We want to hear how Lorri's story or others that you have heard have impacted you. So reach out to us.
You can do that by emailing us or
We still email. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, stc@fredoniahill.org. You can fax the church. I'm just kidding. You don't fax the church.
Or the raccoon.
Do we even have
the
a
raccoon
fax?
took out our fax machine.
Yeah,
that's a story for a different day.
That's a story for a different day. But we would love to hear from you. We'd love suggestions and just what you've drawn from our podcast and the stories that you've heard. So,
all right. We'll see you on the next one. Adios.